Thank you, Vishnu. Hi, good afternoon. Uh, I'm Sujas Ali, CEO of Abasoft Technologies India Private Limited. Let me switch on my video also, 1 second. Hello, good afternoon. I'm Sujas Ali, CEO of Abasoft Technologies and the executive member of GTech and the part of GTech Member Focus Group. GTech Member Focus Group regularly conducting various types of member supporting initiatives, including external panel discussions and member supporting activities. Today, we are going to discuss about the topic budget impact on our business and way forward. We know today this is the most relevant and for business groups and entrepreneurs. Okay, Mr. Guru Prasad is the co-founder of Proactive Advisors. He leads the corporate tax, GST, and customs practice of the firm. Prior to this, he has experience in 12 years in tax regulatory sphere and multinational consulting firms, including KPMG. He has extensively advised the multinational enterprises and Indian companies on tax and regulatory matters and to provide litigation support also. He also specializes in investment advisory, foreign trade policy, SEZ and STPI laws. He has been invited as a guest speaker by ICAI and various industry associations and trade bodies to present on tax and regulatory topics. He has also contributed to online articles and journals. Welcome, Mr. Guru Prasad. We are expecting a wonderful discussion about this Union Budget 2021-22. Handing out to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sujas, for the introduction. And on behalf of GTech, I welcome all the participants for this webinar on clause by clause analysis, which is relevant for all of us. So next 40-45 minutes or so, we'll be discussing and the implications of what exactly the budget amendments or the proposed amendments in the budget have been and how it impacts each of our businesses or on our personal income taxes. So what we intend to cover here is starting with just a brief glance with respect to the budget pillars for 2021 as laid out in the budget by the Honorable Finance Minister. And then we would move on to discuss the direct tax proposals and indirect tax proposals. And also at the last, we would discuss the new levy of agriculture, infrastructure and development cess on the notified goods. So I would request my partner Chinaya Velayudham, who is also present here, to briefly take you through the budget pillars. Chinaya, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Guru Prasad, and a very good afternoon to everyone. There is a technical snag in the video, so we are just trying to get it resolved. So, in the interest of time, we'll just proceed and I'll just get it sorted. So, like Guru had outlined, even last year was based on themes. So, the current year also, the government has continued with large themes based on to allocate funds and direct the funds to. So this year, it largely includes health and well-being, physical and financial capital infrastructure, inclusive development for aspirational India, reinvigorating human capital, innovation and research and development, minimum governance and maximum government and maximum governance. I'll quickly touch upon each of these points. So like all of us are aware, and there has been so much talk on the once in a century budget. I think the once in a century budget largely referred to the pandemic and addressing the situation after that. So the government has allocated 35,000 crores towards COVID-19 vaccination in the year 21-22, and they've also committed further infusion as may be required. And the other point being pneumococcal vaccination for young children. Then overall on the motor vehicles, there is a vehicle scrappage policy which has been put in place like in a lot of other Western countries. So here all vehicles which are of personal nature, personally held, will have to undergo an automated fitness test after 20 years. And all commercial vehicles will undergo an automated fitness test at 15 years. And based on the assessment, they're either allowed to fly or have to be scrapped. So that is a very key point in terms of it will also create demand in the auto sector, but there is also going to be a lot of pushback from the commercial and logistical operators considering the capital outlay in replacement. Moving on in terms of one other key theme which is being all over the news is the disinvestment and privatization. So including a couple of banks, including IDFC, will go the divestment route by the central government, and Life Insurance Corporation of India (LIC) will also roll out its IPO in the coming year. And also the very big, often called termed as a white elephant.
Hey Vishnu, a lot of background voices are coming in.
Can I request the participants to be on mute? And any questions you have, please do feel free to put it in the chat box. Yeah, Chinji, please continue.
So, like all of us have been aware, Air India investment has been on the talks and has been at various levels at multiple times. But government has come out with a timeline saying 21-22, and they will be done with Air India disinvestment. So hopefully there will be quite a lot of news around that, considering the assets Air India holds. So the theme that we get is the government wants to time and again move away from doing the business and just be the policy maker. So that covers the disinvestments. In terms of development of financial and capital infrastructure, the government, with a vision to be that 5 trillion economy that India wants to be, has come out with Atmanirbhar Bharat production linked incentive scheme to create manufacturing global champions in terms of achieving size and competition in the key sectors. So similarly, in terms of textile, there is a mega investment textile park, Mitra, which are being proposed to be launched. In terms of infrastructure, the national infrastructure pipeline will be in place. Similarly, there is an asset monetization pipeline, which is also expected to come in shortly. Overall, with a view to increase the demand, offtake, and the economic activity, there has been a sharp increase in the capital budget. Compared to the previous year by about 35% in terms of infrastructure spending. In terms of financial services, and there is a lot of emphasis, and Guru will also highlight certain gift-specific financial services center in Gujarat, GIFT City. So there are certain exemptions and deductions which are targeted towards moving businesses to the gift. So Guru will cover that as part of that. So this wraps up the physical and financial capital and infrastructure. Yeah, I think largely others are more in terms of aspirational points where further specifics and execution is awaited. So we will, in the interest of time, I'll just hand it over to Guru for the key tax proposal changes, and we will take it up if time permits. Yeah, thank you. Over to Guru.
Thanks, Chinji. So, moving on to the tax proposals, what we have is, though the number of amendments are not too voluminous, but each of the amendments carry significant weightage with respect to its impact on the corporate businesses as well as on the individual taxations. So, uh, thankfully, the rates of income tax have remained unchanged, though there was a lot of speculation on whether there will be a levy of COVID cess or any other cesses just to offset the COVID-19 relief measures and the spend what the government of India had to do over the last year. But the government has chosen not to levy any sort of a COVID cess just to keep in check the inflationary pressures. And one of the significant amendment which has been made is with respect to the definition of the block of assets under the Income Tax Act. Now, if we look at a scenario wherein a business is acquired or business is acquiring a, target or a prospect, at the time of acquisition, once the valuation is done, there will be a goodwill of that business which is supposed to be acquired, and a consideration is also paid towards the goodwill of that businesses. And since it's an acquired goodwill or a purchased goodwill, such goodwill is recognized in the books of the acquirer, and the acquirer continues to claim depreciation on such goodwill. And there's a lot of has been a lot of litigation in this aspect, and the matter has reached to Supreme Court, wherein Supreme Court held in favor of the SSC, saying that depreciation is allowable on purchased or acquired goodwill. Now, to overcome such a Supreme Court judgment, the definition of block of assets have been amended, and goodwill has been kept out of such block of assets. So going forward, what it would entail is, in case of business acquisitions and mergers, even though the consideration is paid for goodwill, but that portion of the goodwill has to be kept out of the block of assets, and depreciation cannot be claimed. And second question would be, what would happen on such goodwill which is already recognized on the previous year's acquisition, which is in the balance sheet as of 31st March 2021 or 31st March 2020. We expect the clarification to be such that the written down value as of 31st March 2020 should be removed from the block of assets. And then thankfully there's a clarification saying that in case in future such goodwill is sold to another party, then the cost of acquisition will be the written down value as recognized in the books of accounts. The next proposal is with respect to investments in a ULIP scheme post 1st of February 2021. So as we understand, the ULIP scheme is a unit linked insurance scheme, meaning that this covers a portion of the premium paid under this scheme covers your life insurance, and a majority of the portion of premium is reinvested by the fund manager into equity oriented funds. Now, what was the tax position as of today or before this proposed amendments was, the premium paid against the ULIP was exempt under Section 80C up to 1,50,000 limit, and upon receiving the policy amount upon maturity, be it after 5 years, 10 years, depending on the term of the ULIP, such amount received was also exempt from the provisions of income tax. So effectively, premium paid was exempt, and the amount received at the end of maturity period was also exempt. Now, the government has proposed to treat such ULIP schemes where the premium is in excess of 2,50,000 rupees per annum. Then, in such cases, though the premium paid continues to enjoy ATC benefit up to 1,50,000, whereas the receipt of lump sum consideration at the end of the maturity period of a ULIP policy, that will be treated as a capital assets and subjected to capital gain tax, which was so far exempt. So this is one significant amendment having impact on most of us who would want to invest our savings into the ULIP schemes. There's one which we need to take care of. And secondly, in case if SSE has more than one ULIP policies, then that 2,50,000 limit is restricted only to such ULIP policies where the premium exceeds 2,50,000 in any of the previous year. However, there's a small breather that the ULIP maturity amount will not be taxable if such sum is received upon the death of an individual who contributes to such policy. Coming to the next type of amendment, the next proposed amendment with respect to the mergers and acquisitions, the definition of slump sale has been amended to include any type of transfer, even though it does not qualify as sale, meaning that even a transfer which does not have a consideration also is being covered under slump sale. Now, under what scenarios will this impact the businesses? Wherever now IT companies will have different business verticals within a company, and if they want to hive off a business, and instead of getting a consideration for hiving off a business vertical, if they get shares of the purchaser in return of selling the business vertical, then some of the assessees in the past used to take a position that this is not a sale because this is only an exchange of shares from one company to another company, and such kind of transactions were not subjected to tax. Now there was a lot of litigation on this aspect. To bring in clarity and to reduce that litigation on that front, the scope of the term slump sale has been expanded to include even those kind of transfer where it where there is no consideration in monetary terms. So effectively non-monetary transfers, including voluntary transfers or gift of shares or exchange of shares, is also considered as a slump sale and made subjected to taxation. And one of the relief measures provided is with respect to investments made in zero coupon bonds issued by the infrastructure debt fund has been made exempt from taxation. And one of the critical aspect with respect to the equalization levy, as we all know that with effect from 1st April with effect from financial year 16-17, we have been paying this equalization levy, and with effect from 1st of April 2020, equalization levy at the rate of 2% was introduced on such businesses on forward charge basis, unlike the existing levy of 6% on reverse charge basis. So what does this amendment actually propose? So the provisions under income tax exempted such payments from the withholding tax provisions wherever such payments were subjected to equalization levy under the provisions of the Finance Act. Now, the equalization levy at the rate of 2% was levied with effect from 1st April 2020. However, the exemption on those transactions were provided post 1st April 2021. So there is a lacuna of 1 year between the levy and between the exemption provided, wherein with the transactions made during the period 1st April 2020 till 31st March 2021 were subjected to dual levy of equalization levy as well as withholding provisions under the Income Tax Act. To put to rest such issue, the exemption under the Income Tax Act has been amended, wherein the exemption which was earlier stated as from 1st April 2021 has been made retrospective and brought it to 1st of April 2020. And one other critical aspect here with respect to the equalization levy is now it has been clarified that if a transaction attracts royalty or if a transaction is treated as a royalty or fee for technical services under the provisions of income tax law, then such consideration for the transactions are not to be considered for payment of equalization levy. The next, moving on to the next proposal, wherein with respect to the contributions of provident fund of employees by the employer to the respective provident fund will be allowed as a deduction to the employer only if such contribution is made to the fund on or before the due date. So earlier there has been a lot of litigation on this aspect, wherein for XYZ reasons, even if employer does not deposit the provident fund amount within the due date, but he still deposits before filing the income tax due date of filing the income tax return. In such cases, deduction of the contribution to the extent of employer's share were allowed uh, by tribunals. Now, after this amendment, any kind of late deposit of PF, that means beyond 20th of the month, if PF is deposited, then the employer cannot claim a deduction from his expenditure. So this will have a wide impact and has to be put into a compliance check with with respect to all the organizations. And one more key aspect on more to do with the individuals who would want to purchase residential unit. So the safe harbor limit has been increased from 10% to 20%, meaning that with respect to certain residential units which have been allotted for the first time for a person and the consideration does not exceed 2 crore, then in cases where due to the pandemic there were real estate stock lying with the developers who under pressure had to sell at a value lesser than the stamp duty value. Now in those cases, the safe harbor limit has been proposed to increase from 10% to 20%, meaning that if the the residential unit is sold at 1 crore rupee and the stamp duty value is let's say 1 crore 20 lakh rupees, then it is only 20% in excess of the it is within the range of the 20%. So they'll not, the consideration for tax purpose will still be 1 crore and not 1 crore 20 lakhs, even though that person would have paid stamp duty on 1 crore 20 lakhs. But if the stamp duty value is let's say 1 crore 30 lakhs, so it definitely exceeds that 20% threshold. Then in such cases, entire 1,30,000 should be offered to taxation as the sale consideration for this residential unit. Moving to the next critical amendment with respect to startups, and where a lot of structuring opportunities will be available for the existing IT companies wherever they want to expand their business verticals and move into a new company. They could explore this option of incorporating a company and then getting a registration with the DPIIT as a startup. And earlier the condition was if a new company wants to take the benefit of tax holiday, which is available for 3 consecutive years out of 10 subsequent years from the date of approval, then they have to incorporate their company on or before 1st of April 2021. Now to facilitate or with respect to the ease of doing businesses, this time limit of April 2021 has been extended to 1st of April 2022, giving new companies an extended year to get registered themselves and claim benefit of 3-year tax holiday out of next 10 years. And one other aspect is wherever an assessee sells a residential property and makes a capital gain, and such capital gain is reinvested in an eligible startup in the form of equity subscription, then to the extent of that such reinvestment, there is a tax exemption being provided. And the condition was to claim this tax exemption, the residential property should have been sold or transferred on or before 31st March 2021. And by way of this budget proposal, that due date has been extended by 1 more year to 31st March 2022. And with respect to the TDS proposals, the tax deducted at source proposals, a new section has been introduced wherein if a buyer of goods has a turnover of 10 crores or above in the last financial year, which is 2021, and then he buys or he purchases goods in excess of 50 lakhs from a person during the financial year. In such case, amount exceeding 50 lakhs, he has to withhold tax at 0.1% of the purchases. However, if you would recall, with effect from 1st of October 2020, there was a TCS provision also introduced similarly on the seller, wherein the seller was supposed to collect TCS in similar kind of scenario, wherein if seller's turnover in the previous year was exceeding 10 crore and in the current financial year he sells the goods in excess of 50 lakhs, then the seller was supposed to collect tax at source from the buyer at 0.1%. Now this is a converse provision wherein the buyer needs to collect tax or withhold tax from the seller on payments to be made to the seller at 0.1%. And wherever this TDS provisions are applicable, then the TCS provisions under 206C1H, which we discussed, will not be applicable on the seller. So wherever the sellers are deducting the taxes or rather collecting taxes under 206C, it is time to update this in the tracker, and the buyer should intimate the seller that where TDS is applicable, he should not collect tax from the companies. And in case the seller does not furnish the PAN, then 0.1% TDS is to be read as 5%. And after the specific proposals, let us now look into the more generic proposals, wherein as a relief measure, the tax audit under 44AB has been done away with for such entities which has a turnover of up to 10 crores. Earlier it was 1 crore, which was raised to 5 crores. Now it has been, sorry, earlier it was 1 crore and which was raised to 5 crores, and now it has been raised to 10 crores. However, subject to the condition that company which opts for this provision should not have any cash payments or cash collections against their sales exceeding 5% of the total sales or total payments made during the financial year. And one another aspect is with respect to where the form of IT company or the form of entity is partnership firms, and the partner of the firm is drawing at the time of dissolution or the time of retirement any consideration from the firm as his share of capital. Then if the partner draws anything over and above his share of capital, then such excess will be treated as is to be taxed as a capital gain in the hands of the partnership firm. And in addition to that, wherever it is a general practice which has been noticed that before the retirement or before the dissolution, normally the assets of the firm are revalued, and the goodwill generated on the revaluation is credited to the partner's account, wherein the partner's capital is inflated. So such kind of revaluation amount which has been credited to the partner's account will not be should not be considered for settlement purposes. And with respect to in deduction on the interest on loan availed on a residential house property, the loan sanctioned between 1st April 19 till 31st March 21 was eligible, wherein an additional deduction of up to 50,000 could have been claimed. Now it has been decided to extend the 31st March 2021 due date to 31st March 2022. And the next proposal is that the settlement commission under the Income Tax Act is proposed to be discontinued. So wherever there were defaults, the SSE, when they knew that there's a sure shot default, and instead of going to litigation, they would go to settlement commission for settlement of the matter. Now that settlement commission has proposed to be discontinued, the only option left with the SSE in case of defaults is either to litigate or to accept and pay the demand. And in sync with Digital India, even the proceedings before the income tax appellate tribunals are proposed to be made faceless going forward. Moving on to the next proposal with respect to taxability of retirement funds. Now, this is more towards the individual. Let's say an individual stays in Middle East or anywhere in the part of the world other than India, and though is a resident at the time of receipt of the retirement funds, but he would have opened a retirement account when he was in Middle East, and that point in time he was non-resident in India but resident of Middle East. But then after some time he comes back to India, and then at the time of retirement he gets that retirement funds into India. So earlier there was an issue with respect to the point in time these retirement funds would be subjected to tax, because India taxes these on accrual basis, whereas in foreign jurisdiction these were taxed on receipt basis. Now their proposal is to tax these retirement funds in India on receipt basis to align with the global standards. One other critical amendment with respect to the companies or the corporates is with respect to rationalization of minimum alternate tax or MAT, wherein we are aware that from 16-17 we had this secondary adjustments in transfer pricing, and wherein due to secondary adjustment an assessee was supposed to bring an additional amount from their parent company. Or if I could give you an example, uh, most of the IT companies would be operating on cost plus model, meaning that if 100 rupees is the cost, then they will add a markup of 15% or 18% depending on the arm's length margin, and then 115 is the invoice value raised on the parent. Now, for transfer pricing agreement, or when the such IT company approaches the transfer pricing authority for an advanced pricing arrangement agreement or an APA, and the transfer pricing authorities decides the markup not to be 15%, instead it should be at 18% or 20%, let's say, for example. So the difference of 5% between 15 and 20 has to be shown in the books of accounts for computation of income tax. And this is called as the primary adjustment, and secondary adjustment is they have to bring that money, repatriate that money back into India if it exceeds a certain threshold. Now, on account of the secondary adjustment, where the invoice was raised for 100 plus 15%, 115, whereas we have the APA for 120, in such cases, uh, the assessee has to approach, and the taxes are paid based on MAT computation and not in the normal tax regime. Then the option is given to the assessee to approach the assessing officer to recompute the MAT considering these secondary adjustments. And moving on to the next proposal with respect to the relief given to the senior citizens, wherein senior citizen pensioners who are of 75 years of age or above, it is proposed to exempt them from the requirement of filing the income tax return, provided the only income they have is the interest income from the banks in addition to the pension income. And one other key aspect is with respect to the reopening of the assessment. Now, income tax is made on self-assessment basis, and wherever even the department assesses and closes it, and they want to reopen the assessment. Earlier, the time limit was 6 years from the end of the relevant assessment year. Now that time limit has been brought down to 3 years instead of 6 years. And with respect to wherever the undisclosed income exceeds 50 lakhs or more for a year, then in that case, the reopening of assessments can be done up to 10 years. And there is a reduction in time limit for filing the revised return or belated return. So far, an assessee was permitted to file the revised return or belated return till the end of the assessment year. So for financial year 1920 till 31st March 2021, a revised return or a belated return could have been filed. Now going forward, that has been reduced by 3 months. So for 2021, the revised return has to be filed by 31st December 2021. And one another critical aspect here is with respect to the reopening of the assessment. So it has been very clear under the income tax provision saying that if an officer wants to reopen the income tax assessment, then he should have the information uh, of undisclosed income or the income being not disclosed or income being short disclosed of the assessee. Now, how do we find out? How do we confirm that officer has this information? So to address this, the government has proposed that wherever the uh, tax officer has the information based on the risk management criteria specified by the CBDT, then it is deemed that the officer has the information to reopen the assessment, so that the assessee cannot question the availability of the information with the officer. And moving on to the next exemption provided with respect to tax deducted at source provisions. So some of the business trust like REITs or infrastructure investment trust, they have been the income or the dividend paid to such REITs or infrastructure investment trust have been exempted from the provisions of withholding tax if the income is paid by such to the business trust by a special purpose vehicle. And one other very important amendment here is with respect to the withholding tax rate on payment of dividends to the foreign institutional investors. Now, foreign institutional investors may have holdings in the IT companies in India. Most of the IT companies are wholly owned subsidiaries of foreign companies, and wherever the dividends were declared by the Indian companies and the dividend was repatriated to foreign institutional investors, a withholding tax rate of 20% was supposed to be done on the dividend income to be paid. Now, there is a question that in case where the double taxation avoidance agreement proposed a lower rate, it could be 5% or it could be 10% in some of the DTA agreements. Whether an assessee can claim the benefit of that DTA was a question mark. Now it has been clarified that the withholding tax rate has to be lower of 20% or the treaty rate on the payments made to the FIIs. And one other beneficial amendment is with respect to rationalization of advance tax on dividend income, wherein if the payment of advance tax, there is a shortfall. As we all know that advance tax needs to be paid in 4 installments, 15%, 45%, 75%, and 100% by 15th of March. Now, if that company is holding shares in another company and that another company declares the dividend, let's say on 15th March, by virtue of that dividend income, the company has a shortfall in the payment of advance tax in right from Q1. So the beneficial proposal here is the interest will not be computed on account of advance tax shortfall if the dividends are not declared. But once the dividends are declared, only after such declaration, the such income has to be considered for computation of advance tax. And another important aspect with respect to withholding tax, where each company has to put in their compliance checklist is wherever there is a withholding tax of 50,000 or more for the last 2 years, and such person for whom we have done the withholding tax has not filed the return of income, then the withholding tax going forward after the 2 years will be at the rate of specified rate or 5%, whichever is higher. So it is also proposed that this provision is not applicable for the transactions where full amount of tax is required to be deducted in case of salary income. So if the employee does not file the income tax return, then this provision is not applicable. But your vendors who has not filed the income tax return, this provision is applicable. But coming to the practical aspect of it, as a company, it would be really difficult to monitor whether the vendor has filed the income tax return or not, unless the company asks that vendor and vendor gives a copy of the return or at least the acknowledgement for filing his income tax year returns for the past 2 years. So this one onerous compliance which has been cast upon on the companies. And to relax the litigation with respect to small and medium taxpayers, a dispute resolution committee has been formed, wherein income declared up to 50 lakhs in the return of income, if there is any dispute with respect to that, instead of going in the normal litigation proceedings, DRC or a dispute resolution committee can be approached. And there is an expansion of scenarios for provisional attachment of the property. So it is now proposed that wherever a false entry appears in the books of accounts and the aggregate of amounts of that penalty is likely to be imposed in excess of 2 crore, then in such scenarios, a provisional attachment of property of the assessee can be resorted to. Then moving on to affordable housing project, wherein with respect to housing projects for the real estate developers which qualify under the affordable housing scheme, the project should have been approved uh, by 31st March 2021. Now there is an extension of time limit till 31st March 2022. And another important aspect having implications on the PF contributions is wherever the contribution to the provident fund exceeds 2.5 lakhs per annum, and this 2.5 lakhs is only the employee's share of contribution, not to be clubbed with employer's share of contribution. So wherever there is a excess of 2.5 lakh contribution of employee from the employee to the provident fund in a financial year, in such cases, the interest income earned for that financial year on the provident fund balance will be subjected to tax in the hands of the assessee. So far, provident fund contributions were exempt under ATC, and interest income was also exempt at the time of withdrawal. Now, after this proposed amendment, any contribution made on or after 1st April 2021, wherein the contribution of employee exceeds 2.5 lakhs per annum, then the interest earned on PF has to be declared as a taxable income in the income tax return. The next amendment is with respect to the leave travel concession, wherein it is proposed to provide tax exemption to the amount given to an employee in lieu of leave travel concession, subject to incurring of specified expenditure, which is again restricted to either 1/3 of the total expenditure or 36,000, whichever is less. Then moving on to GST key legislative changes. So as you all know that any SSE having turnover of more than 2 crore were subjected to mandatory were subjected to mandatory GST audit. Now going forward, it is proposed to do away with the mandatory GST audit. Instead of that, a self-certified reconciliation statement has to be provided by the company officials and filed before the GST tax office. Here, though they have removed the tax audit provision where the auditor used to identify the discrepancies and certify and highlight to the management what are the non-compliances or shortfall. However, with the removal of this mandatory audit requirements, the onus of finding out the wrongdoings is now put on the management of the company, and it's high time to train the company officials who's handling the GST part, be thorough with the GST laws and update themselves, because there's also an equal penal provisions which have been in place, which says that if any person declares or short declares any GST liability, then he will be liable to pay a penalty equivalent to 10% of that short declared GST amount. Another requirement is with respect to availment of the input tax credit. Now, this is a sort of a onerous responsibility which has been cast on the assessees, wherein unless and until a supplier declares the supply in his GSTR 1 and such supplies appear in GSTR 2A of the taxpayer, the credit cannot be taken if it does not appear in GSTR 2A. Now there comes a practical situation wherein for whatever reason there are genuine purchases where we being IT companies, ITS companies have made procurements from the vendor. We have an invoice, we have deducted the TDS, we have paid the vendor inclusive of GST, but the vendor does not disclose this supply in his GSTR1 for whatever reasons. So it is sort of penalizes the genuine buyers from availing by restricting the availment of input tax credit. And we expect a lot of litigation and writ challenging this amendment going forward. And one more retrospective amendment with effect from 1st July 2017 is proposed, wherein interest on delayed filing of the return is to be interest on rather short payment of GST, if any, has to be computed and paid only on net cash liability after setting off input tax credit. And with respect to special supplies made to special economic zones, in the GST law, it provided that wherever a supplier is supplying goods or services to the special economic zone under a LUT, he has to make a declaration on the face of the invoice that such supplies are made to special economic zones for authorized operations. This came in the invoicing rules. However, there was ambiguity with respect to whether any supply to SEZ would qualify for tax exemption or would be considered as zero rated or not. To clarify those aspects, now it is proposed to amend the GST law to specifically include that any supplies to special economic zone developer or a unit is zero rated only if such supply is for authorized operations. So it is imperative both from the supplier to SEZ or an SEZ unit to review their list of approved operations, review the list of authorized operations, and see the list of default services approved by the SEZ unit, which they can procure, and see if that services already appears in the list of default services. If not, approach the SEZ authorities for get a specific approval for those services. Else, it would only increase the working capital blockage. And wherever with respect to export of goods, the repatriation is not made within 9 months, that is a prescribed timelines, then the exporter has to pay back the refund amount along with interest. And there is an increase in provision with respect to seizure of the vehicles, wherein or the detention of the goods during the movement of the goods. If the vehicle is caught and then discrepancy is noticed in the invoice or the e-way bill, then a penalty up to 200% of the tax payable on the goods, or a penalty equal to 50% of the value of goods, or 200% of the tax payable on such goods, whichever is higher, is levied. So this slide is more on additional seizure and detention provisions. And wherever there is a penalty, an appeal has to be preferred only after deposit of 25% of the penalty determined in the order. And with respect to customs law, only two critical amendments there. One is all the exemptions under the customs would now be restricted to up to 2 years from the date of the grant, meaning that with respect to finance, with the proposals in Finance Bill 2021, the exemptions under the customs, all the exemptions under customs, which is enjoyed including by an EOU unit on import of goods without payment of duty, such will be available only up to 1st April 2023. And as we know that as the basic custom duty on few items has been reduced, and to compensate, a new cess called Agriculture Infrastructure and Development Cess as part of duty of customs has been proposed to be levied on approximately 25 goods. And then, but agriculture infrastructure and development cess would not be leviable on imports made under free trade agreement or by a EOU unit, including such units which are operating under advanced authorization schemes. So these are some of the products on which the AIDC, which is Agriculture Infrastructure Development Cess, has been levied. And basic custom duty is also mentioned to reckon with. So while the amendments, as I told you, are not too voluminous, but yeah, each one has their own significant impact. So with this, I conclude my presentation on this. Over to you, Shivan. Sujas, you're there? Any questions? We can probably till Sujas joins, we are open to take any questions. Participants can unmute and ask any questions you have. So we have already sent out these budget updates. In case if any of you have not received the budget updates, do write to me on the email ID provided so that we can send it to you over email. So just you're there. So fair enough. I think if there are no questions, then let's wind up this session, and then you can reach out to me on this email ID on any queries what you have going forward. And thank you all for joining this session.